A lot of people don't understand what progressivism is, and a lot of people have determined that I'm a fake this or I'm a fake that because I consider myself a progressive. Now, or that progressivism is bad, or that progressivism is leftism, or that progressivism is somehow impure in some way. Well, what exactly is progressivism? The guy that I think is the most influential progressive in U.S. history, as far as our political leadership goes, easily goes to Franklin Roosevelt. But let's see, the progressive era. Okay, so the progressive era was a period of widespread social activism and political reform across the United States. And people will go, oh, well, you're a social activist. Yes, social activism is not necessarily a bad thing if it's on the right side of history, which is what the progressive movement was. The main objectives of the progressive movement were addressing problems caused by industrialization, urbanization, immigration, and political corruption. Okay, social reformers were primarily middle-class citizens who targeted political machines and their bosses by taking down these corrupt representatives in office, and further means of direct democracy would be established. They also sought regulation of monopolies through methods such as trust busting and corporations through antitrust laws, which were seen as a way to promote equal competition for the advantage of legitimate competitors. Okay, this sounds kind of like what people voted for Donald Trump to do that he never did, right? Just saying. Okay, let me get to some of these folks. The thing that brought me to progressivism was the fact that I had already been a transhumanist, and I'd already been embracing things like biohacking, transhumanism, and this what's called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So one of the cornerstones of progressivism is the concept of scientific management. Now, what scientific management is it analyzes and synthesizes workflows, blah, 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 blah. This gentleman, the gentleman that created it, his name is Frederick Taylor. Taylor began the theory's development in the United States during the 1880s and 1890s within manufacturing industries, especially the steel industry. Its peak of influence came in the 1910s. Taylor died in 1915, and by 1920s, scientific management was still influential but had entered into competition with syncretism, with opposing or completely complementary ideas. Although scientific management as a distinct theory or school of thought was obsolete by the 1930s, most of its themes are still important parts of industrial engineering and management today. These include analysis, synthesis, logic, rationality, empiricism, work ethic, efficiency through elimination of wasteful activities, standardization of best practices, disdain for tradition preserved merely for its own sake. Meaning, it's fine to preserve tradition if the tradition is doing something. That's the problem that a lot of, I guess you could call me a paleo-progressive. I'm not against conservatism or the social norms, as long as these social norms and these standards of the past, these traditions, are doing something positive for society, okay? And that's what one has to understand. Okay. Flourishing in the late 19th and 20th century, scientific management built on earlier pursuits of economic efficiency. Where you see this embraced a lot, this concept of scientific management, is of course in fascist Italy, which was greatly influenced by the Rockefeller Foundation, and in National Socialist Germany, which was greatly influenced by fascist Italy. Okay, so keep that in mind. While it was prefigured in the folk wisdom of thrift, it's favored empirical methods. Now keep that in mind. It was prefigured in the folk wisdom of thrift. Thrift is a very important thing to the American culture, to the American people. It's one of the things that separates us from our European forebears. We are not wasteful, or at least we didn't used to be. It favored empirical methods, meaning scientific methods, to determine efficient procedures rather than perpetuating established traditions, meaning the concept of progressivism wishes to use scientific methods to make society more efficiently fit the needs of the citizens of the republic. And I'm going to move on to a couple more methods of this type of thing. The efficiency movement, which is this is scientific management, it's another form of scientific management, was also something that was embraced by progressives, okay? This was a major movement in the United States, Britain, and other industrialized nations, okay? It's more known as Taylorism. Remember the gentleman Taylor. Okay, the efficiency movement played a central role in the progressive era. Adherents argued that all aspects of the economy, society, and government were riddled with waste. If you don't see that, this is the thing. People want to talk how we got to embrace Marxism, or we have to embrace National Socialism, or we have to embrace Jeebus, or we have to embrace conservatism, or we have to embrace this or that. How about we just go back to embracing U.S. progressivism? True U.S. progressivism, and I'm going to get into more of that, okay? Everything would be better if experts identified the problems and fixed them. The result was strong support for building research universities and schools of business and engineering, municipal research agencies, as well as reform of hospitals and medical schools and practices of farming. Perhaps the best known leaders were engineers Frederick Winslow Taylor, the guy that, Taylorism, who used a stopwatch to identify the smallest inefficiencies, and Frank Bucker Gilbert Sr., who proclaimed there was always one best way to fix a problem. Leaders including municipal and state efficiency, many cities. Now wait, what I want to keep in mind here, if you don't think that we need scientific reform in the areas of education to get it off of the liberal nonsense that's going on, okay, there is a lot of liberal kookery going on that is destroying the education system. Education is not even education anymore, it's indoctrination, it's not efficient. Okay, if you don't think that the medical practice is inefficient, you're not paying attention, or you don't know. Okay, municipal and state efficiency. Many cities set up efficiency bureaus. I think every city, every town, every county should have an efficiency bureau at this point in time, because it's just ridiculous the amount of waste, corruption, and abuse going on. This is where the progressive era reigned supreme, was reining in the abuse, getting rid of the abuse, getting rid of the corruption, and working towards efficiency so government could more efficiently serve its purpose, and that purpose is to efficiently serve the citizenry. Philanthropy. Leading philanthropists such as Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. Everybody wants to talk about how horrible Rockefeller is. Rockefeller was this and Rockefeller was that. Rockefeller was a great person. The Rockefeller Foundation still funds a lot of anthropological research, a lot of age management research, a lot of amazing stuff is funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and people just don't get it. They don't get it. The conservation movement, which was regarding national resources, came to prominence during the progressive era. Okay? So this is what you have to understand. If you love the environment, and you're not an environmentalist whack job that believes in worshiping the Earth Mother like Al Gore, but if you actually believe in the conservation, like, I'll give you a hint. Okay. One of the things I studied was wildlife and forestry management and park management. Okay? With conservation versus environmentalism. Okay, conservationism, or conservation states, if you want to keep something the way it is, you have to impede entropy. Nature will succumb to entropy. Okay, so like a stream will eventually become a wetland, will eventually become a swamp, will eventually become dry land. The only way to avoid that is to continually dredge and revegetate the banks of that area. Dredge and revegetate. And people, environmentalists, will find some stupid reason, some endangered species, some horse shit, and go, you can't do that. You have to let the Earth Mother heal herself. You know what I mean? That's not conservation. Conservation is based in science. Environmentalism is an insane liberal religion. Progressivism promotes conservation. Who also promoted conservation? National Socialist Germany. Now we're going to get into President Roosevelt here. Before we get into President Roosevelt, I want to talk real quick about Fordism. Fordism is a manufacturing technology that serves the basis of modern economic and social systems in industrialized, standardized mass production and mass consumption. And I'm going to get into this later with automation. Okay? Automation is the next phase of this. Okay? Beyond the assembly line. The concept is named for Henry Ford. It is used in social, economic, and management theory about production, working conditions, consumption, and related phenomena, especially regarding the 20th century. It describes an ideology of advanced capitalism centered around the American socio-economic systems. Okay, they say it's centered around advanced capitalism. Okay, this is where it might pay to actually understand a little bit about Marx. Capitalism is about capital. It's not capitalism in the sense of the economic model per se. Okay, so what you have to understand here is capitalism is not necessarily capitalism as in going after the dollar. It's basically based in production and consumption, the idea of production and consumption. Ironically, the concept of mass production and the assembly line was mostly, even more so, embraced by countries like the Soviet Union, countries like National Socialist Germany. Fordism is the eponymous manufacturing system designed to produce standardized low-cost goods and afford its workers decent enough wages to buy them. This was embraced by the Soviet Union. This is what raised up the Soviet lifestyle. People that say that the Soviet Union was a failure seem to forget that Tsarist Russia was far worse. The life of an average Russian was far worse under the Tsarist regime than it was under the Soviet Union, and it's worse now under the oligarchical system in Russia than it was under the Soviet system. These are things people choose not to understand when they're saying, oh, the Soviet Union didn't work. The Soviet Union proves communism didn't work. No, the Soviet Union proves communism actually does work if you're actually paying attention to the successes of the Soviet system versus the preceding and succeeding systems. Okay, major success stemmed from three major principles. This is Fordism. Number one, the standardization of the product. Nothing is handmade, but everything is made through machines and molds by unskilled workers. The employment of assembly lines, which use special purpose tools or equipment to allow unskilled workers to contribute to the finished product. Number three, workers are paid higher living wages so they can afford to purchase the products. This is important that people understand this. People talk about inflation. Oh my God, inflation. Number one, the major part of inflation right now can be seen by Trump printing trillions of dollars. That's the major concept that's what's causing the major bunch of inflation right now. Number two, and I'm getting into this because of Build Back Better. I like the idea of Build Back Better, which will put resources and dollars back into the U.S. economy, being that everything in the Build Back Better program that Biden has outlined would be made in the United States of America, which would, of course, lead to not only an increase in the production of steel and other things like that, but it will also lead to higher living wages, which will lead to inflation, but not stagflation. What happens when you have higher living wages is more people are making money, more people are spending money, and more people are paying taxes to circulate into the social system. the social system, whether people want to believe it or not, because they try to say that the police aren't socialism. The police are socialism. The emergency services are socialism. The fire department is socialism. Okay? Every aspect that the government does to make your life easier and safer is socialism. OSHA is socialism. These are all socialism. The USDA is socialism. The Food and Drug Administration is socialism. The fact that the drug that you take, the fact that the drug that you buy at the pharmacy usually is safe and standardized unless there was a mistake, that is socialism. That is the government acting on your behalf to make sure some shithead at some company is not poisoning you. Okay, and we're going to move on to Teddy Roosevelt now. A couple things I want to point out about Theodore Roosevelt, what makes him stand out as a unique leader in the United States, is that he was definitely a hardcore proponent of physical culture, a hardcore proponent of living a purer life, a healthy life, and he understood the importance of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant values that this republic was founded on. Progressivism in his day was not this wishy-washy multiculturalist swill that we get today. So he was born Theodore Roosevelt Jr. on October 27th, 1858, died on January 6th, 1919 at age 60, blah, 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 parents, blah, 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 civilian awards, blah, 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 commands, blah, 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 blah. Okay, military awards. Now this is what's important to understand. Roosevelt was a sickly child with debilitating asthma, but partly overcame his health problems by embracing a strenuous lifestyle. Physical culture. He embraced physical culture, muscular Christianity, whatever you want to call it. That's what he embraced. That's what he used to help himself. He integrated his exuberant personality, a vast range of interests and achievements into a cowboy persona defined by robust masculinity. He was homeschooled and began a lifelong naturalist avocation before attending Harvard. His book, The Naval War, established his reputation as a learned historian and popular writer. Upon entering politics, he became the leader of the reform faction of the Republicans in New York's state legislature. His wife and mother both died in the same night, and he was psychologically devastated. He recuperated by buying and operating a cattle ranch in the Dakotas. He served as assistant. Okay, that's enough of that. Okay. Roosevelt. Okay, this is his early life. Roosevelt was born on October. Okay, we already went through that. New York. Okay, President Franklin Roosevelt's paternal grandfather was of Dutch descent. His other ancestry included primarily Scottish and Scots-Irish and English descent. That's important to understand. He is of the founding stock of this republic. He is of the founding stock of this republic. He is not like Trump. Trump was basically the child, well, he was the child of an immigrant. He was a first-generation American. Roosevelt's youth was largely shaped by his poor health and debilitating asthma. He repeatedly experienced sudden nighttime asthma attacks that caused the experience of being smothered to death, which terrified both Theodore and his parents. Doctors had no cure. Nevertheless, he was energetic and mischievously inquisitive. His lifelong interest in zoology began at age 7 when he saw a dead seal at a local market. And after obtaining the seal's head, Roosevelt and two cousins formed what they called the Roosevelt Museum of Natural History. Having learned the rudiments of taxidermy, he filled his makeshift museum with animals that he killed or caught. He then studied the animals and prepared them for exhibition. At the age of 9, he recorded his observation of insects in paper entitled The Natural History of Insects. Roosevelt's father's significant. Notice the role science and an interest in the natural world played in Roosevelt's his natural inclinations, his inclination to be close to nature, his inclination to understand that nature was important. That's going to come in handy. It's going to come in a little bit. Okay. Roosevelt's father significantly influenced him. His father was a prominent leader in New York's cultural affairs. He helped to found the Metropolitan Museum of Art and had been especially active in mobilizing support for the Union during the American Civil War. Even though his in-laws included Confederate leaders, Roosevelt said, "My father, Theodore Roosevelt, was the best man I ever knew. He combined strength and courage with gentleness, tenderness, and great unselfishness. He would not tolerate in us children selfishness or cruelty." Now think about that. This is a very wealthy person raising his children to not tolerate selfishness or cruelty, idleness, cowardice, or untruthfulness. These are all virtues that every American should have. Okay, so of course he went to Europe, Egypt, etc. He went everywhere because he was rich. We get that. Roosevelt was homeschooled mostly by tutors and his parents. Okay, let's get to his political career. Naval history. This is important because he fought in the Spanish-American War. While at Harvard, Roosevelt began a systematic study of the role played by the young... Let's see. First marriage, widower... Okay, early political career. Roosevelt was a member of the New York State Assembly. He immediately began making his mark specifically in corporate corruption issues. He attacked corruption. He blocked a corrupt effort by financier Jay Gould. Okay, Jay Gould, corrupt financier Jay Gould, blocked by a member of the United States founding stock, a Dutch, Scotch-Irish, and English gentleman. Okay. Roosevelt's anti-corruption efforts. Progressivism is about anti-corruption. Helped him win re-election in 1882. Presidential election in 1884. Roosevelt attended GOP National Convention. Cattle rancher. Okay. Second marriage, re-entering emergence of a national figure. Roosevelt intensely disliked being called Teddy. Okay, he was an active... Now, this is what's important. Everybody wants to talk about how horrible the Freemasons are. Heaven forbid people be honest, unselfish, and not lazy. He was an active Freemason and member of the Sons of the American Revolution. Yeah, British scholar Marcus Gunflick evaluates the liberal argument that Roosevelt was an opportunist, exhibitionist, and imperialist, blah, 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 blah. The strenuous life. Roosevelt had a lifelong interest in pursuing what he called in an 1899 speech, the strenuous life. To this end, he exercised regularly and took up boxing, tennis, hiking, rowing, polo, and horseback riding. He also continued his habit of skinny dipping in the Potomac River during the winter. As governor of New York, he boxed with sparring partners several times each week. A practice he regularly continued as president until being hit so hard in the face he became blind in his left eye, a fact not made public until many years later. As president, he practiced judo for 2-month periods in 1902 and 1904, not attaining any rank. Roosevelt began to believe in the utility of jiu-jitsu training after training with Yoshitsugu Yamashita. Concerned that the United States would lose its military supremacy to rising powers like Japan, Roosevelt began to advocate for jiu-jitsu training for American soldiers. Want to know where modern hand-to-hand combat came from? What eventually became military combatives? Roosevelt began to advocate for jiu-jitsu training for American soldiers. Feminists, annoyed by the posturing of men like Roosevelt, insisted that women were just as capable as learning jiu-jitsu to prove their point. Okay, imagine this. This is insane. He's inspiring women to take up jiu-jitsu by simply being masculine. He is inspiring women to take up jiu-jitsu simply by being himself. He is raising women up by being who he is. Okay? By causing them to be who they are. Okay, you get what I'm saying here? Get what I'm saying? Historian, the warrior. This is what's important, because this serves a lot of my ideas of Pan-Americanism and the idea that we should not be tolerating old world powers moving their tentacles into the Americas. Historians have often emphasized Roosevelt's warrior persona. He took aggressive positions regarding war with Spain, and especially with Germany. As a demonstration of American naval might, he sent the Great White Fleet around the world 1907 and 1909. The implicit threat of the big stick of military. The big stick. Talk softly, but carry a big stick. Unlike Trump, who talks loudly and carries nothing and uses words like super duper missile. No, Roosevelt knew the need to have a big stick. Strength, peace through strength. Reagan adopted that. Peace through strength. Don't be a pussy. That was the Roosevelt motto. That's me putting, whatever. So, religion. Roosevelt attended church regularly and was a lifelong adherent of the Reformed Church in America, an American affiliate of the Dutch Reformed Church. Again, a member of our founding stock, the founding stock of this republic. Concerning the motto, in 1907, considering the motto, "In God We Trust on Money," he wrote, "It seems to me eminently unwise to cheapen such a motto by use on coins, just as it would be to cheapen it by use on postage stamps or in advertisements." What his point was is God is God. God is not to be merged with things like, money or things of that nature. It's cheapening a motto, "In God We Trust." When consoling bereaved people, he would awkwardly invoke unseen and unknown powers, aside from a few cliches of Protestant rhetoric. Roosevelt publicly encouraged church attendance and was conscientious churchgoer. Let me explain. He embraced science and religion. Science and religion. Okay? Mr. Roosevelt, religion was as natural to Mr. Roosevelt as breathing, and when travel library for Roosevelt's famous Smithsonian-sponsored African expedition was being assembled, the Bible was, according to his sister, the first book selected. Okay, so I'm going to pause this and move on. You see why somebody like Roosevelt is an important, integral figure in what would be considered the reclamation of Americanism. New nationalism. Everybody wants to talk about nationalism. We gotta be, everybody wants to embrace National Socialism or fascism or some shit like that, right? Why? We have progressivism. We have new nationalism. We don't need anything un-American in America. America has what it needs here. New nationalism. New nationalism. This is what I thought Trump was going to bring when he backstabbed everybody, okay? Economic, social, political nationalism. He brought nothing. He brought nothing but capitalist poison to this republic. But let's see what Roosevelt brought. Roosevelt made the case for what he called the new nationalism in a speech, blah, 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 blah. Socioeconomic policy. The socioeconomic sphere and platform called for a national health service to include all existing government medical agencies. Now, these things were taken further, and I'm not a fan of Franklin Roosevelt, but I'm going to go into Franklin Roosevelt because Franklin Roosevelt's Second Bill of Rights, I think, is extremely important, and I'm going to go into that after this because that expands on some of this. The socioeconomic sphere, so a national health service to include all existing government medical agencies, social insurance, Social Security to provide for the elderly, the unemployed, and the disabled, limited injunctions and strikes, a minimum wage law for women, meaning that people actually got paid something, an 8-hour workday. Wonder where that came from? Okay, there it is, Roosevelt. Federal Securities Commission, farm relief, workers' compensation for work-related injuries, an inheritance tax, a constitutional amendment. Remember, all of these are socialism. So if you've ever gotten workers' compensation or unemployment, That's socialism. Have you ever received Social Security? That's socialism. Have you ever adhered to the regulations, the work regulations as promoted by the federal government? That's socialism. If you don't recognize that, you're an idiot. Electoral reform. Okay, the electoral reforms proposed included women's suffrage, direct election of senators, primary elections. Some of these I don't agree with, okay? For example, I don't agree with direct election of senators. I think it is the job of senators to look out for states' rights and the jobs of the congresspersons to look out for the people's rights. And I believe that senators should be appointed by the governor, honestly. Just because I don't agree with one thing does not mean that I'm not a progressive. It just means I disagree on one point. Anti-corporatocracy, okay? He's trying to get rid of the corporate corruption. The main theme of the platform was an attack on what he perceived as a domination of politics by business interests. A domination of politics by business interests, which allegedly controlled both established parties. The platform asserted that to destroy the invisible government, to dissolve the unholy alliance between corrupt business and corrupt politics. Oh, gee, do you think we might have a little bit of that today? Remember, drain the swamp? What happened? We elected a swamp monster. Okay? To that end, the platform called for strict limits and disclosure requirements on political campaign contributions, registration of lobbyists, recording and publication of congressional committee proceedings. Think about that. Strict limits and disclosure requirements on political campaign contributions, registration of lobbyists, recording and publication of congressional committee proceedings. One of the things I like to quote Rush Limbaugh. On the Rush Limbaugh show years back, he said, if people in the United States paid half as much attention to politics as they do to football, a lot of these politicians wouldn't be getting away with half the shit they're getting away with. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Limbaugh didn't use those words, but it's the truth. If people in this country paid half as much attention as they do to the bread and circuses as they do to the politics, if they paid attention to the politics as much as they do to the horse shit, as much as they do to the football and the basketball and the hockey and the blah, 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 if they looked at politics the same way, they would know that these people are screwing them. Influences in comparison, Okay, we're going to move on. Remember I said that Franklin Roosevelt's Second Bill of Rights kind of expanded on Theodore Roosevelt's concepts. Now, what I want to be sure is I want to make sure that people understand this. Imagine if we continued to pursue progressivism along these lines, as opposed to embracing things like the Reagan Revolution and the regressivism of other people. Okay? Imagine where the United States would be. So the Second Bill of Rights was proposed by United States President Franklin Roosevelt. Okay, this includes a right to work, adequate income, farmers' rights to fair income, freedom from unfair competition and monopolies, decent housing. Now, notice these things. Farmers' rights to a fair income, freedom from unfair competition and monopolies, decent housing, adequate medical care, Social Security, education, employment, and right to work. Most of these things have been achieved. This is why people that say, oh, well, we need to embrace communism, and we need that. No, we don't. We need to embrace Americanism. We need to embrace progressivism. We had already accomplished most of the shit that communists and National Socialists were fighting for through these progressive ideals. We just needed to continue to expand and push forward with progressivism, especially now that we have the technology we do. These rights have come to be known as economic rights, although not to be enshrined within the Constitution. The hope of advocating the policy was that it would be encoded and guaranteed by federal law. Roosevelt stated that having such rights would guarantee the American security, and that the United States that the United States' place in the world depended upon how far the rights had been carried into practice. Meaning, and I said this a lot, you can't judge the prosperity of a country by how well the rich are doing. You judge the prosperity of a country by how well the poorest of the poor are doing. This is why you have people like, for example, when people say how much more advanced Spain was than the Maya. Well, Gonzalo Guerrera did not want to stop being a Mayan when he shipwrecked in the Mayan area of Guatemala and Mexico and married a Mayan woman. And the reason why was because the Mayans, the average Mayan, did a lot better than the average Spaniard, the average Spanish soldier. So, I mean, you got to think of it that way. There is a lot to be said when the average person is doing a lot better. That says something. When the super wealthy are doing great, that's all well and good. But the super wealthy tend to do great no matter what. When the super poor are doing well, that's when you know it's a good society. And that's all for this video.